Welcome to Calling All Creatures, everybody. I am your host, Lori, and tonight we are talking about, I think it's kind of an important topic. It's a topic about honeybees. The podcast title is Buzzkill or Breakthrough, and the truth about honeybee health. And tonight I have Matthew Mulica on with me. He's the Senior Project Director at, oh my gosh, now I'm blanking, of course, at the Honeybee Health Coalition. And he's going to give us all sorts of great information about honeybees and what's going on with them and how we can maybe help these little guys out, because they're important to us because they pollinate a lot of our stuff. So, Matthew, thank you so much for being on the podcast tonight.
Thanks for having me, Lori.
I'm glad that you're able to come on and give out this important information about honeybees, because I don't think a lot of people understand, that the populations are kind of declining, and we might have quite a bit to do with that. So I'm glad we'll get to talk about all that stuff.
Yeah, this is really looking forward to it.
So what kind of first drew you into the world of honeybees and pollinator health? I mean, how'd you get started doing all of this stuff?
Well, so I'm a mediator, and I work for an organization called the Keystone Policy Center, and we take on difficult or intractable issues where you have to use science and collaboration and to bring people together and work on or manage any given problem. And so back in 2013, we did an assessment on honeybee health, and found that there's a lot of great organizations out there doing amazing work, but there wasn't one organization that sat at the intersection of agriculture and bee health. We really are all ag system. So a lot of the bees are placed throughout ag lands, and so we have to work together if we want to solve this problem. And so we convened the initial set of stakeholders in 2013 and launched the Honeybee Health Coalition in 2014, and have been going strong ever since.
Nice. So for listeners that may not be real familiar with the Honeybee Health Coalition, how would you describe this coalition in plainer terms for these guys, so they kind of understand who's all making up the coalition and what you guys are doing?
Sure. So the coalition's about 50 organizations, and it is the entire supply chain in agriculture. So you have your beekeeping organizations like the American Honey Producers Association and the American Beekeeping Federation. You have crop associations, soybeans and almonds and various fruits and vegetables and apples. So those associations are members. We have agribusiness at the table, so your Bayer and Syngenta, BASF, Corteva, and others. We have the EPA and the USDA and federal government agencies, NRCS. A lot of universities participate, and we have a whole research arm, and so we have, and then other NGOs. So there's many other nonprofits that work on this. So the idea was, let's have one big tent. Let's talk about what we're doing. And I think we're going to get into this, but one of the reasons that I think this has been successful and so long-standing is that we recognize that all of the problems that are causing bee health decline are interrelated. So pesticides and mites and poor nutrition and forage, all of these things we have to work on equally. And so the coalition, that's what we do. We bring people together to develop projects and programs that can help reverse honeybee health decline.
Nice. Well, it's good that you guys are all getting together to try to figure this out and help out the bees, because it sounds like they probably need some help right now. So, in your opinion, what kind of makes your coalition unique compared to some of the other conservation efforts that go on?
I think it's the stakeholders involved, and the fact that you don't often have beekeepers and farmers in the same room talking to each other, along with chemical companies, the U.S. government, and all of these folks, it's just a really unique group of individuals and organizations that care deeply about bee health. And so, I think what has kept us together is our ability to have honest, frank conversations and decide where are these places that we can have a positive impact.
Right. So before we kind of get into a little bit more of the discussion, can you give the listeners just a little bit more information about honeybees? I mean, what their lives are kind of like, kind of the things that they actually do. And I know, like many bees, they probably have like the queen and then the workers and stuff like that. So can you just give us a little more general information about honeybees?
Yeah. So there are 4,000 species of native or wild bees in North America. These are the bees, the bumblebees and the mason bees and, the blue desert bees. They fly around your backyard. And then you have managed honeybees, which is Apis mellifera. These are European honeybees. So I like to say they've been naturalized at this point. I mean, they've been here for 500 years. And so these bees, the honeybees, are really the workers of our food supply system. So 1 in 3 bites of our food require a beekeeper with an 18-wheeler to pull up when the crop is blooming and pollinate that crop. And so you have in your hive, anywhere from 70,000 to 120,000 bees. Generally, the bees are all female. There's a few drones. The drones are the males, and they can't sting, and they will mate with the queen. And a queen will only be mated with once for her whole life. And the most of the workers are females. They attend to the queen. They forage. They have all kinds of different jobs. And so, when you have these bees in the hive, they will, generally keep on proliferating, laying eggs throughout the season. They, often will overwinter, and go dormant when it's cold out. And a queen will live, anywhere from 1 to 3 years. So I'm trying to think, the bees are incredibly interesting social creatures. So the actual being, or like the living being, is the hive. So a single honeybee is not. It is an organism. It cannot live on its own. The colony is really the organism. And so just fascinating creatures that we really rely on. So that's kind of a long and winding answer, but it's good to differentiate between honeybees and native bees, and understand that the honeybees are the ones that beekeepers keep and that pollinate our food.
Now, is there any way to kind of tell the difference between, say, a honeybee and another bee that's not a honeybee?
Yeah, honeybees are very distinct looking. One thing I can say, like, a good way to tell a honeybee or a native bee from, say, a hornet or a wasp is that honeybees and native bees kind of look very soft and kind of friendly when you look at them closely, whereas a hornet or a wasp have really spiky hair on them, and they kind of look just a little bit sharper. And so, that's one distinction. And then, of course, all bees look very different. Of course, a honeybee looks very different than a bumblebee. And with 4,000 species, they all kind of look a little different.
Okay, I was just going to say, because obviously I know bumblebees are kind of, I think, fatter. You might say fluffy or stuff like that. But, so, okay, interesting. So we do often hear that bees are essential, but what does that kind of really mean for people in their everyday lives?
Well, imagine walking into your grocery store and a third of the fruits and vegetables are gone. So that's the impact bees make. So they support $18 billion in agriculture a year. So all your cucumbers and your melons, your peppers, your almonds, apples, pears, watermelons, all of these fruits and vegetables require pollination services. With 330 million people in this country, we really can't rely just on the native bees to pollinate all the food that we eat. It's a very organized system, and so incredibly important to agriculture is having these bees available and healthy to be able to pollinate the crops that we eat.
Okay. So, I mean, it sounds to me like if we were kind of looking at the broader picture of what our agriculture and food systems would look like without all of these healthy honeybees doing what they're doing, we would be looking at almost nothing when it comes to crops and things like that in our food, from what you're saying.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, your row crop agriculture, corn, soybeans, wheat, they don't need bees. Bees, can forage on those crops. But it's the specialty crops that heavily rely on bees.
Okay. So, well, and it probably as well, I mean, we're not just looking at like our food crops and stuff like that either, are we? We would be also talking about, don't they help pollinate for like the, our flowers and things and stuff like that too?
Sure, yeah. Ornamental flowers, sunflowers, bees, and especially, native bees and certain flower species evolve together. And so a lot of bees are only found in areas with certain flowers because they've been paired up through evolution. And certainly all bees love the flowers in your backyard. Certainly important flowers as well.
So they kind of fit into that the broader pollinator world alongside your native bees and some of the other species, because it sounds like the honeybees do a little bit more for like maybe the agricultural side and stuff, and the flowers like you just said, but then you have your native species that are kind of endemic, and they kind of help take care of their little area of pollination and stuff. Yep,
it's all really it's a very pretty complicated system, but I think they're all very important in their own ways.
So, what would you say are the primary threats to honeybee health nowadays?
Well, the simplest way to put it, and it's mostly accurate, is that there's three main causes of bee health decline, and so you have a lack of good forage and nutrition. So we have 2.5 million hives, and the beekeepers don't own enough land to place all of their hives. They have to rely on agricultural land. And so when they're out there, there has to be enough flowers for them to forage on. And so when there's not, then you have a lack of good forage and nutrition. When they're out on the landscape, they're often inadvertently impacted by pesticides. And so those two factors are weakening factors. So not enough forage and nutrition, impact from pesticides, weaken the bees. And then there's a mite called the varroa mite that is ubiquitous. It's all across the country, and that mite transmits diseases to the hives. And if it wasn't for lack of good forage and nutrition and negative impacts from pesticides, maybe the bees could better fight off those diseases. But it really comes together as a perfect storm of those factors, and that's what really kills the bees. All three of those things.
Okay, so it sounds like the varroa mites are a big danger, but again, like you said, it's all kind of put together with different things, the nutrition, and then these mites and stuff like that. Now, I'm sorry, why are the mites so destructive again? They're the ones that bring the disease into the bees?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the varroa mite evolved alongside a different species of bee called Apis dorsata in Southeast Asia. And when it was introduced in the late 80s into North America, and it found the honeybee host, the honeybees didn't have an effective way to combat those mites. And so that's why it's so destructive. And then they transmit disease, which kill the bees.
Okay. And a question that just kind of pops into my mind when we're talking about different species of bees and stuff, like we've been having a problem now for probably I don't know how many years, but we have the Africanized bees that are coming in as well. So how big of a danger are they to the honeybees? I mean, are they helping to kill some of the honeybees? Do they intermingle with the honeybees and produce more of a hybrid type of bee? What's going on with that?
Yeah, so killer bees, that's just a genetic trait of honeybees. So killer bees are honeybees, but they're just very aggressive. And so you get them traveling up from Mexico and Texas, really warm climates, and so they are just very hard to manage. So you wouldn't want really a killer bee genetics to intermingle with your other honeybees that you're using for pollination, because eventually all of the bees would get very aggressive and impossible to manage, because as soon as you go near the hive, they would attack you.
Right. And that's not good if you can't get near the hive.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure the beekeepers like to go and harvest the honey that the honeybees make. So, yeah, that's... Speaking of which...
incredibly important that we not have, too many Africanized bees and that we keep our genetic stock separate.
Right. And speaking of harvesting honey and stuff, how much honey does a honeybee hive produce normally?
I think it really depends. I think I've heard 30 to 70 pounds per colony, but it's very variable.
That can be a lot of honey when you stop and think about it. I mean, especially when these beekeepers have, a lot of them have more than one hive. So, yeah, that's quite a bit of honey that's getting harvested when you stop and think about it, to go into our foods and just, for honey, for people that like to eat honey on their stuff. So,
yeah, so it's, you have this huge industry of backyard beekeeping, and those people might have, 1 to, 8 hives. And so 80% of the beekeepers are backyard beekeepers, and those backyard beekeepers have about 20% of the hives. The commercial beekeepers, who might have 1,000, 10,000, 20,000 hives,
wow,
they make up about 20% of the beekeepers, and they manage 80% of the bees in the country. So your big honey producers, they are producing tons of honey.
Wow. Now, typically, when you have all of these hives and stuff, do the beekeepers? Obviously, out in the wild, or maybe even with the backyard beekeepers, I don't know. Do the honeybees make their own hives, or what are the hives that they are given? Especially for the big commercial ones, what are these hives typically like? Are they made out of a certain material for the honeybees, or what are they?
Yeah, it's called a Langstroth hive, and they are made of wood, and they have when the bees are ready. So there's brood chambers where the queen lays eggs in cells, and those are the bees that are almost constantly hatching. And then on top of that is there's what's called a queen excluder. So the queen can't get up into the higher boxes, and so she doesn't lay eggs in in the higher boxes, and those are called honey supers. And so when the honey flow is on, when all the flowers are, when all the plants are flowering, the honey bees will store the honey in the cells in the top boxes. And as they fill them up, the beekeepers will put more and more honey supers on top of those boxes. And so that's why you see sometimes, 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes on top of each other. And that's as the colony is growing and producing more honey. They have places to grow into and then places to store honey.
Okay. And normally the queen, now obviously she lays the eggs and stuff. What all does she actually do in the hive? I mean, is she kind of like, obviously she's the queen, is she kind of in charge? Does she direct her workers in a certain way, or how does that work with her?
All she does is lay eggs.
That's all she does is lay eggs?
Yep. She'll go out once to make a mating flight, and of course she can't mate with her own offspring, her own drones, and so she flies out, and there's a mating that goes on in the air with neighboring honeybee colonies, and interestingly, after the male drone mates with the queen, he explodes or he pops.
Oh my gosh!
And just dies. And then she goes back. She's been inseminated, or she has the semen for the rest of her life from multiple drones, and then her work for the rest of her life is to lay eggs.
Wow! And how long does the queen bee usually live?
Anywhere from 1 to 3 years.
Okay. So not like days or anything. So it's a longer lifespan than what some other insects have. So, So then the drones and stuff, is it just kind of inherent in them what they're supposed to do as the drones? I mean, to go out and pollinate and do the honey and stuff like that.
Yeah, the drones just inseminate the queen, and then that's maybe 5% of the bees, or even less. Okay. And then 95% of the bees are the workers, the females, and they have many jobs, from tending to the queen to foraging to cleaning out the hive of dead bees, kicking out the drones before winter. They'll actually shoo them out of the hive, so only the females overwinter. Oh, wow. And really the last job of a worker bee is to forage, and they basically forage until they die. So they the last job is to forage until basically they can't make it back to the hive anymore.
Okay, so the poor drones, they just kind of get the short end of the stick all the way around.
Well, the drones, they have one job, and then the workers have another, and the queen is another.
Right. That's amazing that the male pops after the mating. I mean, you hear about things like the praying mantis eats the the male, and and the black widows and stuff like that. So it's interesting what some of these. I learn so many new things when I do this podcast about all these different insects and animals. It's amazing.
It really is amazing.
There's ants that blow up too. I did a podcast about ants. I found out about that. They have EMT ants. They have ants that'll blow up. They have all sorts of stuff that go on with ants. I was amazed. So.
Yeah, who knew that blowing up was such a major part of nature?
Yeah, yep. So, and we've been talking about, several different things that kind of all factor into a lot of the honeybee health. So like pesticides, habitat loss, and nutrition, those all kind of interact together to put their health in jeopardy. I mean, it's not just one thing alone, it's all of these things together.
It is, yeah, and that's really what they figured out with colony collapse disorder, which was, they didn't really know, and so we really don't use that term anymore because we have a good idea of why the bees are dying, and it's really all of these things together.
So do you think things are getting any better, or are they getting worse, or are they just more complicated than they were before?
Well, last year, 62% of all the bees died.
Oh,
so that was the worst it's ever been. And so I would say that things are not getting better. And so you have a lot of people working on this, and it was just kind of a perfect storm last year where they just didn't make it in large numbers.
So, are we doing anything to at least help out with the pesticides and stuff that we have out there? Are we trying to figure out what we can do if we have to use a pesticide, what might not harm the bees as much, or are we trying to find an answer to using something other than pesticides to, like, say, maybe kill off the insects that we don't want eating our plants?
Yeah, with as many people in our country as we have, and the agricultural systems that we have in place, pesticides are a part of our agricultural system. The neonicotinoids that farmers use now are a lot better than the pyrethroids and organophosphates that we used in the 50s and 60s that were actually giving farmers cancer. There are biopesticides that are being developed, and really it comes down to making sure that farmers are following the label, that they're not applying the chemicals in the heat of the day when bees are flying, that they're providing fresh water sources that are clean of pesticides, and that they're, especially when they're planting, that they're using like fluency agents on the seeds so that they don't rub against each other and cause dust that harms the bees. And so, yeah, there's a lot of work being done on all different aspects of pesticides and bee health.
So right now, could you tell us what some of the most impactful initiatives are that the coalition's currently working on?
Sure. So we are developing or have developed best management practices, BMPs, for corn, canola, soybeans, and apples. We have an educational module for pesticide applicators for how they can do their jobs and protect bees. We have research projects on finding the next varroacide. And so you have these, compounds that beekeepers put into their hives that kill the mites but don't kill the bees. And so you can imagine it's a difficult thing to kill a little bug on a big bug without killing the big bug. And so we're trying to find new ways of doing that. We are working with the federal government to improve federal conservation programs so that we can get more flowers out on the landscape, especially in and around ag lands. And we're generally just a conduit for people to talk. With so much research and projects and programs out there, this is a space and environment for everyone to know what's going on and to figure out ways to work together.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad that, you're working with the federal government and stuff like that to, help get this stuff taken care of and try to figure out some answers. And it kind of sounds like, it sounds like science and research is playing a pretty big role in some of your strategies that you guys are coming up with.
Yeah, it's incredibly important. If bees were cows, we wouldn't have these many issues because we just know so much about cows, for example. So the bees are really something that we're understanding better, and also how to control the impacts of these mites, the diseases they vector, pesticides, and all of the ways that we can improve bee health. Research and bringing people together in collaboration are huge.
Right. Well, yeah, it's always a big thing when you have to bring a bunch of people together to try to figure things out. Do you happen to have an example you could share where this collaboration between the farmers, beekeepers, and stuff has made an actual difference that you've seen so far?
Well, it's hard to pinpoint any one action because it's a huge system. So the United States is a massive country. We have many people that live here, and there's countless efforts going on to improve bee health, to plant flowers and protect the bees from pesticides. And 60% of the bees died last year. And so it's despite our best efforts, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I mean, that's too bad that so many bees died last year. I knew I had heard, there was a bunch of alarms and stuff that were being kind of raised over the amount of bees that had died last year and stuff, and that's what kind of brought all of this to the forefront. I think more is hearing about how many died in trying to understand what an impact that's going to make on our environment and our agriculture.
Yeah, it's very, very alarming. So the Honeybee Health Coalition convened the Domestic Losses Steering Committee. So that was the U.S. government and all of the beekeeping organizations and other apiary inspectors of America. There's a great organization called Project Apis M that does research and funds research. And so we brought everyone together and acted as the response team for the country.
So for, say, average people like myself and other listeners and stuff that are out there, what would you say are some simple, meaningful ways that we could help support bee health to try to help you guys with what you're doing?
Sure. So I think the number one thing is to buy local honey. It's got so many benefits for people and reducing allergies, and it just supports your local beekeeper. And so buy local honey, plant flowers. Native bees, honeybees, they require pollen and nectar. And the only way to get pollen and nectar is through flowers. So planting flowers in your backyards on land that you own is very important. And finally, if you do apply pesticides in your landscaping, follow the label. Most people don't ever peel off the back of that landscaping, pesticide if they use one. But if you do, you have to make sure that you're following the label. You can also provide, clean water sources for bees. But I think those are generally the top four things I would say is buy local honey, plant flowers, follow the label on your landscaping pesticides, and maybe have a little water source for them.
Are there any specific plants or other practices that you might recommend for creating a pollinator-friendly space? I mean,
it just depends where you live. You want to have, native flowers are great. You want to make sure that the plants that you're planting are appropriate to your elevation and climate. And there's a number of, seed calculators. If you go to pollinator.org, which is the Pollinator Partnerships website, you can find a seed calculator, a design mixer.
Okay. That's interesting. I know because here in Arizona, I know there's certain plants here that we have that are bee friendly and will attract the bees and stuff like that. So,
yeah, and if you're buying pollinator plants from garden centers, you might ask if they've been treated with neonicotinoids. Probably better if they're not.
Okay. Well, that's always good to know. So if anybody out there is getting plants like that, that's something you need to check on. That's something that probably a lot of people don't realize that, they need to check and see what may have been used on those plants when they get them.
Yep, exactly.
So can you tell us a little bit more about, obviously buying, local honey and stuff like that, but how can consumers kind of make more informed choices that can help support the pollinators?
I think it's really just buying that local honey, making sure that it is honey. There's so much, if you're in the grocery store and you see honey that's, $1.99, you might check the label and look at the ingredients list to make sure that it's doesn't say like honey product. It'll often say things that are a little bit suspicious instead of just saying ingredients honey. So
right.
the real honey it's probably going to be $5.99, $7.99, and not $1.99. But that's your indication of what you're buying. Is don't just buy the cheapest stuff that's probably not honey. So, and from a consumer standpoint, I think that's the biggest thing.
Well, that's good information, because probably a lot of people don't really think that, they're just thinking if it says it's honey, and they don't really look at those ingredients. So that's a good thing. And yeah, I mean, I would kind of expect if you're getting the real honey that's just honey, that it probably is going to be a little more expensive than this other stuff that has all these ingredients thrown in. So. Yeah.
A lot of times, especially foreign imports will take honey and they'll blend it with high fructose corn syrup, for example. And so, it tastes like honey, and it passes the inspection when they're getting at the ports when they're bringing it in. But it's not honey. It's maybe half honey or a third honey, and the rest is high fructose corn syrup and other sweeteners.
Right. So, and honey is much better for you if it's just regular honey than it is if it has a bunch of sweetener stuff put in it. So, and like you said, there's all sorts of uses you can use honey for. I was just reading online, some other uses and stuff that you can use it for. So, comes in handy for a lot of things.
Yeah, it's a delicious product. Nature's sweetener.
Yep, exactly. So, what kind of gives you some hope about the future of honeybees?
I think that the beeple. We call them the beeple.
The beeple?
The people that work on bee health is an incredible community of researchers and scientists and all these NGOs and the federal government. They're all working really, really hard on all of these issues and really leaving no stone unturned on how do you solve this problem. And so that's the one thing that, if I could pinpoint one thing, it's all of the incredible students and postdocs and up-and-coming researchers that are just doing incredible things. There's new modeling, and people are even bringing in AI to help solve some of these problems and understand all of these systems that are interacting. It's incredibly complicated, and all of these things, the people, the technology, it's all hopefully leading to us better figuring out how to solve this crisis and to improve bee health.
Well, hopefully. I mean, a lot of people are turning to AI for a lot of different things, so hopefully it'll help you guys out with what you're trying to do there at the coalition and figure out some of this stuff for the bees, and maybe even help you to kill those little mites on the bees.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Matthew, we're kind of getting to the end of our discussion here. I mean, you've given us a whole lot of stuff to think about and a whole lot of information, and hopefully people out there will take a lot of this to heart and do what they can to try to help out, and bring this bee health back up, and hopefully we don't lose as many bees as we did last year, and it continues to improve, because it really is not going to be good if we lose our bees.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Well, thank you so much for hosting me on your podcast and just asking some great questions and having a nice conversation.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, and like I said, I like to learn more, and I know my listeners do too. And with that being said, where can listeners kind of go if they would like to learn more or get involved with the coalition?
You can go to honeybeehealthcoalition.org, and you can see all of the different programs and projects that we have on there. If you're an educator, we have curriculum for K through 8 on there, whole spreadsheets of curriculum in Bianca's Educator Corner. We're a small nonprofit, and so you can go to our website and donate. Every little bit helps. And as I said, just spread the word about buying local honey and making sure that you're planting flowers, and all of that stuff can be found on our website, honeybeehealthcoalition.org.
Awesome. Well, hopefully you guys will go and then check out the website and get some more information, and let's all try to do what we can to help out the honeybees and keep their populations healthy, because we really don't want to lose the honeybees. It would not be good for our, like I said, agriculture and our ecosystems and stuff like that. But Matthew, again, thank you so much for being on the podcast tonight. I appreciate it, and I'm just going to announce my next couple podcasts coming up. You're welcome to stay on, or you're welcome to jump off. I know you probably have other things to go do. So,
thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
All right. Thanks, Matthew. You too. All right, everybody. So that was a pretty good, interesting podcast to learn more about the honeybees and what we can do to try to help them out. So I'm hoping that you guys will go and check out the website and get some more information about honeybees and what we can all do to try to help these guys out, because losing 60% of our bees last year is probably not a good thing. So let's do what we can to get those populations back up. So with that being said, for my next upcoming podcast, I am going to have a Project Freedom Ride on June 11th, and my guests are going to be Roman and Jennifer McCann. So Roman is an awesome kid. He started this Project Freedom Ride back when he was, I think 5, if I remember correctly. He's 13 now, so they've been doing it for the last few years. Anyway, his mom and dad have helped him out, and so basically they're going to shelters, and they're transporting animals to other places or to adoptive homes, wherever they need to go, whatever's needed of them, and getting these animals, dogs and stuff, out of the shelters. And they even have fostering as well. So kudos to Roman and his family for doing such awesome work and trying to help out the animals, especially with him starting at such a young age. It's awesome when you see kids that are driven to do things like this and try to help, and it's encouraging to know that there are kids like that out there, like Roman. I mean, I know there's quite a few different ones, but and kudos to any of you guys out there, any of you kids out there and your families that support you in doing things like this. But we're going to talk more with Roman and Jennifer about Project Freedom Ride and how it all got going, and what all they're doing and what projects they're working on, and that'll be June 11th. And then after that, on June 25th, podcast, the Orca Behavior Files, is going to be on, and we're going to be talking about orca whales. So I am so looking forward to learning more about the killer whales and their behaviors and stuff like that, and what's going on with them. And my guest is going to be Monica Whelan Shields, and she's an orca researcher, and she has been studying orcas for a number of years. And so she is going to be on the podcast to talk with me about orcas and give us all sorts of great information about them and their behaviors. And I know we've been seeing probably in the news here lately something about orcas' behaviors, and that they're going after more ships and boats and stuff. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, I'm sure it's scary for the people that's happening to, but it's also interesting to me that this is going on, because is something driving them to do this? Is it, what's going on here with their behavior change, that they're going after more ships and boats and stuff like that, when I don't think normally do those kinds of things. So that's going to be a pretty interesting podcast, and I'm looking forward to talking to Monica about orcas and their behaviors. So don't forget, I hope you can come back and join me on June 11th for Roman and Jen and Project Freedom Ride, and then on the 25th about the orcas with Monica, and learn more about those guys and their behaviors. So I'm looking forward to those two podcasts. I think they're going to be good ones. And with that being said, that's pretty much the end of the podcast tonight. Went just a little bit shorter, but that's okay, because some of them go a little bit longer. But I was glad to talk with Matthew and get more information out about the honeybees and what's going on with them and how we can help. So I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. Stay safe out there. Don't get into trouble. And I hope you all have a great weekend. And don't forget to come on back in a couple weeks to learn more about Project Freedom Ride. And then after that, about the orcas. All right, everybody. Have a good night now. Bye.